I think obviously he matured a huge amount during the course of the year. So from the start of the year to the end of the year, you are talking about two different people. There were race wins in between, a raft of pole positions, and they all served to consolidate his ability and also consolidate his confidence. He was never without confidence, but he just got better at what he was doing. The 97 was an evolution of the 95, and when we first tested the 97 at Rio, both Elio and Ayrton were present. Elio drove it and said, well, the car was quick, but there was something in the front end that he really wasn't sure about or understood, but it felt a little bit different to the 95. Ayrton got in and was very quick and said, well, for me, it is what it is. If Elio is saying that there's something not right and it could be better, then I actually don't know because I've got no reference. And so immediately you were starting to see what I would call an absolute honesty when it comes to describing the car. If he didn't know, he would tell you he didn't know. He could only comment on what his experience showed or allowed. That car, or those cars, and it started with the 94, carried on through the 95, and the 97 was no different. Were all had fundamentally similar characteristics, just getting better from model to model. So they were easy for an engineer to set up. We had like 3 different front springs, 2 different rear springs. We'd balanced the car on the bars, and aerodynamically, it was very efficient. And the engine, Renault's qualifying engines were very strong. The race engines were probably not as strong as the Hondas that we were up against in 85. But certainly Ayrton was a major compensation in that. The consumption wasn't
right.
as good as perhaps what we wanted.
What was the key or most important thing in terms of setup for Ayrton?
It was always balance. Always balance. In reality, it was about the races in those days were about maximizing your engine performance over the course of the race due to the fuel tank limitation.
Yeah.
And so we were keen on the outright performance of the car, and the balance of the car was generally easy to find. Very rarely did we struggle. Austria was one of the circuits we did struggle in 85, but the rest of the circuits, I think, generally we were very competitive. But it was about getting the car to have good race pace. In other words, not have to wind the engine down too much relative to the others to actually get to the end of the race, but also have pace during that period of time.
Could he do more with a slightly wayward rear than most drivers, or could he do more with nursing understeer than most drivers? I mean, what was the key thing for him? Could you say if he had a front end that worked, he could drive the car, sort of thing?
He had the most delicate. He was able to make the cars in that era had a huge amount of horsepower or performance, engine performance, and therefore you could very easily destroy the rear tires if you wanted. His throttle technique, which has been well documented, I think not only enabled him to manage the balance of the car, but also enabled him to preserve the tires as well. So I would say you could go nearer to neutral with him than other drivers. and he would make the difference up himself by his touch. He was probably the most sensitive individual I've ever experienced in the cockpit in terms of feeling the car. I want to use the word delicate, but that's not the right word. Sensitive is probably the best word. He would feel the car through every surface that his body came into contact with. That would be the soles of the feet, the palms of the hand, because they were stick shift, his sensitivity on the steering wheel, and the feeling through his body in terms of the seat. And I'm sure 84 was a big learning experience for him, but that continued in 85, and on a number of occasions he would say, once we understood what was happening for a certain characteristic that we were feeling, he would often say to me, I'll remember that, so we'll know that for the future, or I'll remember that feeling, and I won't forget that. And what I think we saw, which comes back to one of the early points that I made, during the course of the year, his experience grew with the car at a very quick rate. And so by the time we were setting the car up at the end of the year, he knew where he needed to be, and we could get there pretty quickly if it wasn't there when we started.
He suffered quite a lot from cramp and body aches and pains. Was he more pedantic than most in terms of cockpit comfort?
I would just say he taught us to ensure that we had done everything possible to make the driver comfortable in the car. There are some drivers that had a higher degree of tolerance to either discomfort or whatever, and he had a very high tolerance as well. But he would just keep reminding you, we've got to do something about this, we've got to do something about this. And on race day morning, I personally would tape his right hand up to protect him on the gear lever, and occasionally we'd have to redo it if it wasn't done right. He was always conscious of never using either a pair of gloves or a helmet or shoes that he had never run before for an important drive such as qualifying or the race. He was just very. It's all common sense,
yeah.
But he was just at the forefront of ensuring that all happened.
And was the 97T pretty good in terms of cockpit comfort?
If you look at that car compared to a modern Formula One car, you'd say it was, my God, how did those drivers ever get in it and put up with it? And so Formula One cars have come a long way since then. But having said that, and the drivers didn't wear knee pads in those days, and this, that, and the other. They were a different breed. Having said all of that, we did with him really take care of how he fitted in the cockpit, and it was not that we didn't do it for Elio. It's just Ayrton was he had that. You just wanted to do it for him. It's as simple as that. He just had a way that you knew that it would be better if you did it, and he would go faster for longer. His spatial awareness and overall awareness of what was going on around him was at a different level to not only all the drivers that I worked with prior to that, which was only Nigel, to be honest, and occasionally Elio, but also it continued for a long while after that. I mean, I couldn't until, I suppose you really need to get towards the Hakkinens, but in the late 90s, before even Mika when he drove briefly alongside Ayrton in '93, he was blindingly quick. But I'm not sure the awareness was there, but the awareness caught up with that by the time we got to '98.
Qualifying, how did he prepare for qualifying, and why and how was he so good, apart from the obvious of being very fast?
He was the first driver I saw that would actually sit in the car with his eyes closed and visualize what was going to happen. And he sometimes he would do it in the motorhome, sometimes he would do it for fun, but he took the visualization of a qualifying lap to a new level for '85. And that stayed with him for many, many years. And it also became the model that a number of other drivers used, either as a result of that or as a result of those drivers seeing the benefits in it.
And how accurate could he be in his mind on the lap?
Phenomenal. We used to play with the stopwatch. He was very, very good. The other thing on qualifying, he would sit, and I'm sure you've seen many pictures, with the TV on the dash bulkhead, watching the TV, and he could visualize in his mind from that very simple TV signal that we used to get in the mid-'80s, what the track density was like and where people were and when was a good time to go, and judging. And then the other thing he was excellent at, which we soon cottoned on to help him with, was the timing of that very last lap, because so many laps he did where he took pole, he would cross the line very close to the checkered flag, knowing that basically the track was clear in front of him, and he would have, and he had the ability to actually deliver some stunning laps.
Yes,
right at the last minute.
I remember being very aware of that down at Williams, and I suspect, Steve, you had probably quite a lot to do with that, with introducing that sort of rigid structure of not rigid, but the structure of the qualifying session, of how late you can leave that lap if you manage it well.
Yeah, and there was a driver that wouldn't lose their nerve. And I see it today, even with our drivers here. We've got to go. And no, hold it. And you can see the more they get agitated, the less they're going to perform unless you let them go.
These days, there's a huge song and dance about how you use the tyres on the out lap before that qualifying lap. Was that an issue at all in '85?
Very much so, because they were qualifying tyres.
And how did Ayrton do that?
Well, he once described it to me, and I'm sure I wasn't the only person, that doing a qualifying lap was like tying a necktie. And he said sometimes you get one tail too long, and other times you get it one tail too short. But when you get it right, it's very satisfying. And what he was trying to describe was, you, the driver, have got to judge bringing the front tyres in, or we nowadays we call it the phasing of the tyres.
Yes.
That's phasing the front tyres in with the rear tyres. You could always bring the rear tyres in with your right foot, but it was about getting the front tyres in and still having rear tyres left to get you through the lap once the fronts were in.
How would you explain his ability to know prior to the lap exactly where he could brake on the softer, beautifully brought in tyres, on which he only had one lap to run anyway, but he knew where he could brake, where he could put the power on, where the grip level was going to be? How would you describe that?
Well, we always used a set of tyres at the end of free practice in the morning. And then there were two sets of tyres for the afternoon session. Mm-hmm. So you had 6 qualifying tyres over the weekend. Mm-hmm. And we always tried to give him the qualifying try, as we used to say in the morning. Mm-hmm. And then he would use his first set of tyres in qualifying very wisely, and often, and Imola 85 was no exception, he took pole with that first set of tyres on Saturday, mm-hmm. which was the second qualifying session, And then Peter Waugh was adamant that he didn't want Ayrton to put either him or the car at risk doing the second set of tyres. But Ayrton was very equally adamant that he just wanted to go and have fun on the second set of tyres, and knowing that he didn't have to actually set a time. So he wanted to, what he was saying was he wanted to experiment with the opportunity of doing a no pressure lap,
right,
and see how much it was better. For me, he was an absolutely super guy, and I shall remember the contact that I had, which was always very warm and always very genuine, both during the time he was at Lotus, and also after he left, and even before I joined McLaren. And I've often told people that, you know, in the years after he left to go to McLaren, sometimes the phone would ring in the evening at home, and it would be, "Hi Steve, it's Ayrton. You know, how you doing? What's going on? Just wanted to give you a call." And it was really, really a very warm relationship. It was very professional, in as much as I knew if we gave 100%, he would more than match it from the cockpit. And that was one of the absolute thrills of working with him. It was, you know, the more you put in, the more you got out. For me, absolutely unequivocally, for his era, and also spanning, you know, my experience with drivers, subsequent drivers, he was the absolute business. Mika was equally quick and dedicated, and as was Kimi. Different styles of people and different eras and different cars that they had to deal with as well. But Ayrton was phenomenal.